"You'll never be a real mother," my sister's cruel words. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and stopping my heart. You'll never be a real mother because you're adopted. My own sister. My flesh and blood. No, wait, that's the problem, isn't it? We don't share blood. And in that moment, with those 9 cruel words, she made sure I would never forget it. Drop a heart in the comments if someone's words ever cut you so deep you still feel the scar. I'm Sophia, and today I'm sharing how my sister's brutal comment nearly destroyed my dream of motherhood. The childhood trauma of feeling less than because of my adoption. The earliest memory I have about my adoption isn't actually about finding out I was adopted. It's about the aftermath, sitting on my bed, clutching my favorite stuffed elephant, and staring at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. I was 5 years old, and my parents had just sat me down for what they called a special talk about how I joined our family. They used all the right words: chosen, special, meant to be. They showed me pictures of the day they brought me home, their faces glowing with a joy so pure it radiated from the faded photographs. My mother cried happy tears as she described the moment the social worker placed me in her arms. "It was like the missing piece of my heart suddenly appeared," she said, squeezing my hand. I nodded and smiled, because I could tell that's what they needed from me. But inside, a tiny earthquake had begun, shifting the tectonic plates of my identity. If I was chosen, that meant I was first unchosen by someone else. If I was meant to be with this family, why wasn't I born into it? These weren't questions my 5-year-old mind could articulate, but they were feelings that lodged in my chest: confusion, abandonment, otherness that would grow roots and branches as I did. My sister Melissa was 7 when I learned the truth. She'd known I was adopted since my arrival when she was 2, but it had never seemed to matter until I knew too. Something changed between us that day. Looking back, I realized she must have sensed the shift in family dynamics, the extra attention my parents gave me, their careful monitoring of my reaction, the special Adoption Day celebrations they instituted alongside my birthday. To a child's mind, this special treatment wasn't about addressing my trauma or insecurity. It was favoritism, plain and simple. The first time Melissa used my adoption against me, we were fighting over who would get the last popsicle in the freezer. Trivial, as most childhood battles are, but the weapons children choose can leave lasting wounds. "Mom said I could have it," I insisted, reaching for the freezer door. Melissa blocked my way, her face set in that stubborn expression I knew all too well. "Number, you always get what you want because you're adopted and everyone feels sorry for you." I froze, the word adopted landing between us like a grenade. Until then, it had been a special word, wrapped in my parents' love and reassurance. Melissa had turned it into something else: deficiency, a reason for pity. "That's not true," I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, a new doubt took root. What if she was right? What if my parents' love was tinged with pity? What if everyone saw me differently because of this thing I had no control over? I told my mother what Melissa said, watching her face carefully for confirmation of my new fears. Her reaction, the flash of anger, the immediate reassurances should have comforted me. Instead, it only confirmed that Melissa's words had power, that they had touched on something real and raw. Melissa was grounded for a week. The popsicle melted, forgotten on the counter during the ensuing family drama. And something essential between my sister and me began to melt away too: trust, solidarity, the unquestioned belonging we should have felt in our shared home. As we grew, Melissa's tactics became more sophisticated. She rarely mentioned my adoption directly. Her parents' swift and severe reaction had taught her that much. Instead, she found subtle ways to emphasize our differences, to draw boundaries around real family that somehow excluded me. "You look just like Mom when she was your age," a relative would say to Melissa at family gatherings, and my sister's eyes would find mine across the room, a silent reminder that no one would ever say those words to me. "It's definitely a family trait," she would say when someone commented on her and our mother's matching dimples or their identical laughs. Small comments, innocuous to anyone else. But to me, they were breadcrumbs, forming a trail that always led to the same destination. I was different. I was other. I was less. Middle school brought new dimensions to this pain. As we studied genetics in science class, learning about dominant and recessive traits, Melissa developed a sudden, intense interest in family heritage. "Did you know our great-grandmother came from Ireland during the potato famine?" she would announce at dinner. "That's why we have these green eyes, Mom. It's in our DNA. Our DNA. Not my DNA. Never mine." She began collecting family photos, creating elaborate family trees for school projects, always finding ways to emphasize bloodlines and genetic connections. Each project was a paper cut to my heart, small enough to seem inconsequential to others, deep enough to leave another invisible scar on me. The cruelest part wasn't that Melissa knew exactly what she was doing, it was that I couldn't properly explain why it hurt so much without sounding oversensitive or ungrateful. "She's just proud of her heritage," my father would say, missing the point entirely. "You have your own heritage too," my mother would add, as if my unknown origins were equivalent to their well-documented family history. But how could I connect to a heritage I knew nothing about? My adoption had been closed, international. The only information my parents had about my birth mother was that she was very young, possibly a teenager, from a rural province in China. My birth father was completely unknown. My cultural roots, my genetic history, my biological connections all were blank spaces I could fill only with imagination. As puberty hit, these blank spaces became chasms. While Melissa navigated the changes in her body with our mother's guidance, I started my period at exactly your age. Those growing pains are just like I had. I faced each physical change as a mystery. Who did I take after? Would I be tall or short, develop early or late? Every unanswerable question was another reminder that part of me was missing, unknown, untethered. The teen years brought dating, bringing a new arena for insecurity. My first serious boyfriend, Jason, made the mistake of saying I looked exotic compared to the other girls in our predominantly white suburban high school. When I mentioned this comment at dinner, trying to process how it made me feel, Melissa seized the opportunity. "Well, you are different," she said, her tone suggesting this was an objective observation rather than a calculated jab. "It's not like you blend in with us. That's probably why he likes you. You're like a conversation starter." "Melissa!" my mother scolded, but the damage was done. In my already fragile teenage mind, I translated her words into their cruelest interpretation. I wasn't valued for who I was, but for the novelty of my difference. I was an accessory, a talking point, a curiosity. The relationship with Jason ended shortly after. The first of many I would sabotage because I couldn't believe anyone could love me for myself rather than for what made me different or special. After all, if my own sister saw me primarily through the lens of my adoption, how could I expect more from anyone else? High school graduation should have been a fresh start, a chance to define myself on my own terms. But as I prepared to leave for college, a different one than Melissa, thankfully she found new ways to remind me of my outsider status. "Mom and Dad are going to miss you so much," she said, as we sorted through childhood memorabilia, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. But at least they still have one real daughter at home. The casual cruelty of it stopped me cold. What did you just say? Melissa looked up, her expression a perfect mask of innocence. What? I just meant they'll still have me around, since I'm living closer to home for college. But we both knew what she'd said, what she'd meant. After all these years, after all the family therapy sessions and parental interventions and promises to do better, she still saw me as less than real, less than her, less than family. I left for college, with that wound still fresh, but also with a desperate determination to reinvent myself. Away from Melissa, away from the constant, subtle reminders of my difference. I thought I could finally become someone defined by my choices rather than my origins. For a while, it worked. I made friends who knew nothing about my adoption until I chose to tell them. I excelled in classes where no one had preconceived notions about my abilities or limitations. I even fell in love with Michael, a compassionate architecture student who listened when I talked about my complicated family dynamics and never once made me feel that my adoption was something that diminished me. But the foundation of my identity had been built on unstable ground, and it took very little to shake it. A casual question about family medical history during a routine doctor's visit, a professor's assignment to research our cultural backgrounds, a friend's offhand comment about looking just like her mother. Each instance would send me spiraling back to that core insecurity. I didn't know where I came from, and without that knowledge, how could I know who I truly was? Michael suggested therapy during our junior year, gently pointing out patterns of self-sabotage and insecurity that I couldn't see clearly myself. My therapist, Dr. Chen, was the first person who helped me understand that my adoption trauma wasn't just about being relinquished by my birth parents. It was equally about how that fact had been weaponized throughout my childhood by the one person who should have been my closest ally, my sister. What Melissa did, Dr. Chen explained during one particularly illuminating session, was take your most vulnerable, point your sense of belonging, and repeatedly target it to establish her own security within the family. It wasn't about you being adopted. It was about her fear that your adoption somehow threatened her place. This perspective was revolutionary. For the first time, I could see our childhood dynamic not as confirmation of my lesser status, but as evidence of Melissa's insecurity. The revelation didn't heal all wounds, but it helped me understand that her behavior reflected her issues, not my worth. By senior year of college, Michael and I were discussing marriage. I was happier than I'd ever been, more secure in who I was and what I wanted. I was even considering searching for my birth mother, not because I needed her to complete me, but because I was finally strong enough to face whatever I might or might not find. That's when Melissa dropped her nuclear bomb. It was Thanksgiving break, our first time all being home together in months. Melissa had recently broken up with her long-term boyfriend and was, as my mother euphemistically put it, going through a difficult phase. I was helping her clear the table after dinner when she asked about my plans with Michael. We're talking about getting engaged after graduation, I told her, unable to keep the happiness from my voice. We both want to finish school first, get established in our careers, and then start a family in a few years. She was quiet as she scraped leftover mashed potatoes into a storage container, her face unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm. A family, she repeated. You mean kids? I nodded, a flutter of unease stirring in my stomach at her tone. Eventually, yes. We both want children. Melissa set down the serving spoon with deliberate care. Then she looked directly into my eyes with an expression I can only describe as cruel satisfaction. "You'll never be a real mother because you're adopted," she said, each word precise and measured for maximum impact. "How could you be? You have no idea what motherhood even means. You don't know your real mother. You don't have that bond, that connection. You'll never understand what it truly means to be a mother because you never had one yourself." The world stopped. The kitchen faded. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears as her words echoed, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. "You'll never be a real mother. Never a real mother. Never real." In that moment, every insecurity, every doubt, every fear I'd ever had about my adoption came rushing back with devastating force. All the progress I'd made, all the healing, all the careful rebuilding of my sense of self-it, all seemed to crumble under the weight of those 9 words. Because here was the thing. Deep down, in the most vulnerable part of myself, I had worried about exactly this. Would I know how to be a mother without having experienced that primal bond with my own birth mother? Would I somehow be lacking some essential maternal instinct? Would my children sense some deficiency in me, some missing piece that made me less than a real mother? Melissa had found the perfect target, not just my past insecurities about being adopted, but my future fears about creating my own family. With surgical precision, she had connected these vulnerabilities and delivered a blow designed to devastate both. I don't remember what happened immediately after. I have a vague recollection of setting down the dishes I was holding, of walking out of the kitchen, and up to my childhood bedroom. I remember calling Michael, my voice shaking so badly he could barely understand me. I remember him offering to drive the 3 hours to my parents' house right then, in the middle of the night, and my declining even as I desperately wanted to say yes. What I remember with perfect clarity is lying in my old bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had placed on the ceiling as a child, and feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Not just separate from my adoptive family, but untethered from any family at all, past, present, or future. In that dark night of the soul, Melissa's words seemed to have severed my last connection to the possibility of belonging. Morning came, as it always does, even after the darkest nights. I woke to the sound of my father making coffee downstairs, to sunlight filtering through the blinds I'd forgotten to close, to the realization that I had a choice to make. I could let Melissa's words define me, or I could finally, truly break free of the power she had held over me since childhood. I chose freedom. But freedom, I would learn, is not the same as healing. Freedom was deciding to leave that morning without confronting Melissa, driving back to campus 2 days earlier than planned. Freedom was telling my parents I needed space from my sister without fully explaining why. Freedom was choosing to protect myself by creating distance. Healing would be a longer road, one that would require confronting not just Melissa, but my own deepest fears about motherhood, family, and identity. It would require me to answer the question her cruel words had forced me to face. What does it really mean to be a real mother? And was she right? Would I never be one because of how I came into this world? The drive back to campus that November morning was a blur. Tree lines and highway signs melted together as tears clouded my vision. I had to pull over twice when the sobbing made it impossible to see the road. Michael called repeatedly, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that my entire future, our future, had been called into question by 9 cruel words from my sister? When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed on my bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. My roommate, Zoe, took one look at me and knew something was seriously wrong. She sat quietly on the edge of my bed, waiting for me to speak when I was ready. Melissa said I'll never be a real mother because I'm adopted, I finally managed to say, my voice hollow. Zoe's face darkened with anger. That's complete bullshit, Sophia. Your sister is toxic. But even as she rushed to defend me, to dismiss Melissa's words as meaningless cruelty, a part of me clung to them. Because here was the terrible truth I couldn't admit even to Zoe. What if Melissa was right? The question haunted me in the weeks that followed. It infiltrated every aspect of my relationship with Michael. When he finally proposed the following spring down on one knee in the University Botanical Gardens, where we'd had our first date, first thought wasn't joy, but fear. If I couldn't be a real mother, what right did I have to accept? To promise him a future that might be fundamentally broken because of what I lacked. I said yes anyway, because I loved him more than I feared the future. But Melissa's words had planted a seed of doubt that grew like a weed, strangling the confidence I'd worked so hard to cultivate. Michael noticed the change in me. How could he not? I stopped talking about our future children, changed the subject when he mentioned starting a family. When we visited friends who had babies, I held back, watching Michael interact with their children while making excuses to keep my distance. What's going